Today's episode is brought to you by our company, NanoChomp Marketing Strategy and Analytics. We help product and marketing teams solve problems and experience growth using data and approachable AI. Visit nanochomp.com to learn more.
Hey everyone, today on the Sound Bites podcast, our guest is Bob Buda. Bob is the CEO and founder of Buda Consulting, specializing in database management, security, disaster recovery, and business analytics. Bob has been an expert in the field for a while now and was actually among the first certified Oracle database administrators. Today, Bob and his team design and deliver solutions that help organizations safeguard and optimize their data. Bob, thanks for joining us on the podcast today.
So nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So the way that we like to kick these podcasts off is really start telling us where you started, how you got where you are today. And that can be from the very beginning or a certain point, like a certain inflection point that kind of got you on this path.
Sure. Well, I guess we'll start right from the beginning. I started in computer technology in college, like most of us did. And that was really at the beginning of the, I would say, the general availability of computers for businesses. Prior to when I started, I graduated high school in 1980. So that kind of gives you a sense of when I began. And prior to that, it was really only really large businesses that had computers. Right about that time, mini computers from companies like DEC, Digital Equipment Corporation, really started to come out. And even the computer science field in colleges was really just beginning. So I went through high school really not having a whole lot of interest in computers because no one ever talked about them. When I went to college, this is actually a true story. I didn't know what I wanted to do, and we opened up the book of curriculums in the college that I went to, and I literally closed my eyes and put my finger down, and it landed on computer applications, which is what they called computer science at my college.
And at the time, that was in the math department, right? It wasn't even a part of the engineering department. It was like a subset of math, right?
I don't know for sure, but that sounds right. It probably was a subset of math. But it was all about really how to program. I started out in a community college in New Jersey, and I really got a great foundation of just writing Fortran code and assembler even. Many of your listeners probably never heard of assembler. It's a very low level computer language. And I worked with Fortran and COBOL and C and some of those really early languages. Got a really good foundation in computer languages. And then I went to Rutgers University, where it was a much more theoretical program. And that's where I learned about database systems. And I just fell in love with databases and data at Rutgers. And from that point, that my career just stayed on that path really the whole way.
And when you think about it, like the early days of programming, we're talking about punch cards and putting things programmatically through a machine that's then turning gates on and off. And really quickly, we go from that to, like you mentioned, a higher level language like C that's built on top of assembly. And then you're at a spot where we're able to start storing big amounts of data. And big amounts of data then would be a megabyte, right? That's the edge of the universe of data. And now we think of the average picture on an iPhone is 8 megabytes, 12 megabytes, but that was like all the data a business would ever create would be a megabyte. So now you need to get to the point of how you store it and save it, right? And that's where you started studying.
That's right. And of course, during the course of my career, it has just totally exploded. The amount of data is unimaginable now, from when we started. And everything about it has changed. The amount of data, the kind of data that we keep, the way we store it, the formats, the physical devices that we use, even the locations of it. We no longer. It started out we would store data when we were able to get it out of the computer and store it externally. It started out on big flexible floppy disks that were similar to albums. You guys both look young enough. You've probably never seen a floppy disk, but they were.
I used them. I had them on a Tandy to play games.
Okay, so those were big flexible disks, and then we went down to the 3.5-inch hard hard cassette discs. Um, and now, we've flown past, the little drives, flash drives, and
Mhm.
we no longer keep data physically at all, at least for our personal data. Now everything is stored in the cloud. Um, there's a very good reason for businesses to still use hard copy data, and maybe we could talk about that a little bit later as we
Yeah.
as we get into business topics. But most of us don't even worry about keeping data on flash drives anymore, and that's because it got so big that it got out of hand, and then the cloud came to kind of rescue us from that.
Yeah, it is wild to think of how much data we actually just store, like randomly on my desk. I got a couple terabytes of drives just for backups, right? But when we think about even in college, now kids will see the save icon and not necessarily have ever seen the thing that it references. Like, oh, that's the button you push to save a file. And it's like, do you know why it looks like that though?
Right.
Right?
That's right.
So
The little
it's
the
kind
little
of,
thing that looks like a cassette tape or a diskette. That's right.
yeah, it's kind of weird how disconnected that is from how we're actually storing data now. So what was the path that made you create and start executing Buddha Consulting?
So, great question. So I come from a family of entrepreneurs. My dad owned a small civil engineering firm. My uncle owned a printing business, and my other uncle owned an accounting business. So it was just always there. The family always talked about their business interests. So I kind of always knew that. I didn't know what it would be, but I kind of always knew I'd have my own business. And my very first project, as soon as I got into college and I started doing this kind of work, my side job was as a baker in a bakery in Staten Island. And my the boss there, when he learned that I was doing computer work, asked me to build him a system that would enable him to essentially put in all of his recipes and all of his suppliers, and that it would calculate how much it costs him to make each cake or cupcake or
Hmm.
donut, so that way he could price his things appropriately. And so I built that, and it was such a rush to build that system and give it to him and see him use it and improve his business with it. I think that's what really lit me on fire in terms of doing database work. Now, of course, back then there were no databases. There was probably IBM had a database, and Oracle was in its infancy then, but it was only for really large scale things. So this was before smaller, more consumer friendly databases came out, like DBase and RBase. So
Mhm.
I had to build a database in order to do that, out using
Got it.
C. And it was a really fun project. A quick little kind of funny story that I like to tell about that project, and this is another. This also shaped my I would say development and my direction. The day before I was due to deliver the that project to my boss at the bakery, I remember I was sitting in my mother's basement in Staten Island, putting the final touches on it the night before on my TRS-80 computer,
Okay.
and I still remember I pushed the wrong button. I don't know what button it was, but I erased the whole thing, everything, the program, the data that I had preloaded all the data. It was the whole thing was gone, and no one thought about backups then. I certainly didn't. And I remember just going white. I just couldn't believe I did it. I was terrified. I had to go and face Al in the morning and tell him, it's all gone. So I went to see him in the morning, and he couldn't have been more gracious. He said, "Look, it's okay. These things happen. Just do it again." So I spent the next couple of months rebuilding it. It was probably better the second time, because things are usually better when you do them the second time. But I had no notes. I had nothing. I had to really do it from scratch, and that's what really, I think, gave me the passion for disaster recovery,
Hmm.
because I
Okay.
saw
Yeah.
what happens if you're not really if you're not really careful about keeping copies of the important things. You may have to do it all again. So it was painful at the time, but I think it was a really good lesson.
Like that's a fun first project, right? It's like you don't think about, hey, a bakery is going to be your stepping stone into the high tech world of database architecture, but here we
That's
are.
right.
Well, I was actually thinking, like, as a baker, you have to be pretty precise and
Yeah.
analytical. Chefs, they can play jazz a little bit, and if something goes wrong, they can pivot. But if you mess
Absolutely.
up when you're baking bread, it can be catastrophic. Do you think maybe that's why you were drawn to it in some way?
That I hadn't thought about that, but you're absolutely right. Baking is chemistry, and if you don't get everything exactly right and the timing exactly right, things don't taste right or they burn. So that's it's a really great insight, Lauren. I hadn't thought about it, but that may be why I was drawn to it,
As a
because
fellow baker myself, I think maybe that's why I was like, oh yes, I'm a horrible cook, but I can bake pretty well if I can follow instructions. And
I I'm the same way. I can bake a good cake. I can't decorate it very well, but I can bake a good cake. But when I cook, I love to cook.
Mm,
But it's just because it's imprecise.
yeah,
What I love about baking and about IT work is it's precise. If you
yeah.
do it right, it's going to work every
Mm.
time. With cooking, that's not always the case. With baking, it almost always is. The only thing you may be dependent on that you can't control is the oven. Sometimes
Right.
the oven just doesn't,
Hot
isn't
oven
doing
or
exactly
uneven, it's a
right.
nightmare.
But
Totally
everything
agree.
else you can control. You can control how
Mm.
much of every ingredient. You can control the quality of the ingredients, which that's another parallel there to data.
Mm.
If you put bad ingredients in your cake, it's going to be a bad cake. And if you put
Sure.
bad ingredients in your database, it's going to give you bad information. So I hadn't thought about that, Lauren. But there's a lot of parallels there. I like it.
Maybe the botched batch of brownies that I made. Wow, that was a tongue twister.
Alliteration.
That that I tried to do on Friday. It was just really hitting home. So
There you
it's
go.
really bringing back bad memories.
So after, just to finish answering your question, it's taken me a long time to answer that question. Um, After I did that, because I had family in the business, they all said to me, "Hey, we need systems. Build us systems." So I built payroll systems for my uncle and for my dad, and that's how I really got my first taste of actual work where it really mattered for companies. Um, and um, that worked for a little while, but I really wanted to get a sense of working for others. So my first real job, if you want to call it that, was working for the Attorney General's office in New Jersey,
Okay.
as a DBA there. Did that for a few years. And then I went to the commercial world, working for a company called Betts Labs that was eventually bought by GE.
Mm.
They did water treatment chemicals. And my job there was building their EH&S systems to manage all the data around health and safety, of their products. And that this was again before SAP and some of the really major players had turnkey systems to manage a lot of that data. We had to build all that, so we built material safety data sheets and all these things for that company. So I was there for a few years, and I continued working with them for a long time after that, even after I built my own business.
Hmm.
Um, and it was really a stepping, I stepped into having a consulting business, because even while I was working for the government and while I was working for Betts, I still did side jobs, and after leaving GE, I was able to get a gig that was almost full time. It enabled us to pay the bills. We had just bought a new house at the time, so that was really important. Just had a baby, and I needed a full time gig. So until I got that, I really wouldn't have been able to go out on my own. But that worked, and ever since, I've just been gradually building my team. And I say gradually, I mean very gradually. I have 14 people now, so we're not a big team, and I like it that way. It's a nice size for a company. We all still know each other. We work really well together. We help each other out, and
Well,
now while I'm
that's
still,
important in a
it
in a
is.
space that you're working in. It's extremely important because, like, you look at your whole career and everything you've touched has been high consequence, right? You're in the food space, you're in working with EH&S water chemicals, you're working with a district attorney. There's not a lot of room for, whoops, like we'll clean that up later. There's not a lot of room
Right.
for that. So having a teammates that you trust and you can work together with is super important in this space.
Trust is the most important part of that sentence. You know, because in order for me to delegate, I have to completely trust my team. I have to know that they're going to do the right job every time, and that if there's any issues, they're going to be able to come to me and say, "Hey, we need to work through this together," or better yet, work with each other. And they do that. I have a team that totally trusts each other, and what that does is it magnifies the team. You know, you don't have a bunch of individuals. Now you have, you know, what do they say? The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. That's really
Yeah.
true with a team.
So
I'm
go
wondering how you
ahead.
go about, if trust is like the number one thing that you need in an employee, how do you vet someone new to bring on to the team? I know you're slow to grow, which makes sense. So maybe like, what does that process look like? And because trust is earned over time and over,
Hmm. Sure.
after experiencing a lot of positive interactions and projects. So how do you go about doing that with, or like vetting a new teammate?
So this is almost true for all of my people. They almost all of them came to me through referrals from other team members,
Mm,
and so there's an instant level of trust there. You know, they know what I expect. Usually it's when I've worked with them for a long time. Most of my team members are with me for years. You know,
gotcha.
we don't have we don't have any, very little churn. So
Mhm.
so they're with me for years. So when I need a new team member, I'll reach out to them and say, hey, do you have anybody that has this skill that you've worked with, that has the qualities I value, and we can talk a little bit about those qualities in a minute. They're very well defined, um, and so really, to answer your question, that's how we vet. It's almost always through referrals. The few times that it's not through referrals, I'm just really crazy about references. That's to me a resume is okay, but there's nothing more important than references. And references are tricky because everyone's afraid to say anything bad, and everyone gives only their best reference.
Exactly.
But there are questions you can ask a reference that can really get to the truth of how a person is. Um,
What's like one question maybe that's helped you do that?
one question I like is, rather than saying, how is this person at XYZ? Um, I like to say something like, if you could rank this person among all the people you've worked with doing this task, would they be in the top 5%?
Mm,
And if the answer is, like, you'll hear them, you'll hear them
yeah.
hedge if that's not the case. And if sometimes I'll start a little lower. I'll say 10%. If they say yes, I'll say, how about 5%? And it kind of draws them to the truth,
Mm-hmm.
but it frees them up from having to lie. So
Yeah.
there's, you really have to be careful with references. Um, but but again, there's nothing better than a referral from a trusted team member. And my team members know a lot of people. They all have a lot of experience, so they've worked with many people. So, and that's one of the reasons we're so close. By the way, there's connections among my team because some of them have referred to
Yeah.
each other, have referred to each
And
other.
you end up with that accountability that if someone refers someone over, they don't want that reflecting poorly on them. So you can think that there's going to be a level of performance there, similar to your ranking system or your 10% question, 5% question. We've had people that will want to rank someone 1 to 10, but you can't select 7 because like
Yes,
seven's the
right.
safe answer. Like it's good, it's a C plus, B minus. That's good. But if you can't do it, you're really forced. Is this person a
Yep.
6 or an 8?
Yep.
And it really puts you in a spot, which is interesting.
The reason I like the percent question a little better than the ranking number section
Hmm.
is because it puts them um, in the perspective of others. So it's
Yeah.
comparing others rather than just that one individual. Where are they compared to the other, whatever DBAs that you've had on your team,
Yeah, I
in
like that.
terms of disaster recovery or in terms of whatever. So hope that helps, answer that question about, how I pick the team.
Yeah.
I've had really, really good success. In all the years I've worked, I've only had really let two people go.
Hmm.
And that's really painful,
Yeah.
to do that. But I've been very fortunate that I've just made good selection. So I haven't had to do that. And there's been a couple that have left on their own accord. When they kind of saw that it wasn't working out.
Yeah.
Because there's a long process before letting somebody go. Of
Oh
course.
yes. It's a long process for sure.
Although let me just interject real quick. It's a long process, but they know immediately, because I have to take them off customer projects if there's a problem immediately. So so they know right away. I don't completely break ties. I'll put them on an internal project, if it's iffy. But if there's an actual problem, they're not on any customer projects. So they immediately know that there's an issue.
Yeah. That makes sense. They're kind of getting really quick feedback there.
Exactly. Right.
You've had folks with like low turnover, even though it's a small team. How would you describe your company culture, and why do you think it works?
So this comes back a little bit to the values question. When I ask them, what values do we want in our, when I ask them, bring somebody on, is there somebody that 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 can work with us? They know our company core values very well, because we go over it once a month at our meetings. We have 12 of them, and they are. It just happens that there's 12. So every month I talk about this month's core value,
Oh,
and
okay.
so they very well know what those are, and they'll know if they're going to refer somebody, whether they actually meet those core values or not. And so that's how they, so for example, one of our core values is, willing is admitting mistakes. So if we make a mistake, we call it out immediately. We tell the customer, we tell each other, we own we own our mistakes. Another one is willingness to learn from others. So asking others for help. That's one of our core values. So all 12 of these are really critical to what builds a good team, and I think that's how I know that I'm going to get somebody good, because they're measuring anybody they refer to us based on those core values.
I think that's really good, and it makes a ton of sense because it's not obvious, but all the things that you're mentioning are all things that intuitively a high performer almost wants to mitigate, right? Accidentally, they don't want to ask people questions because they don't want to look like they don't know, right? They don't want to signal that, ooh, something's going wrong. I need to early ask for help. Like we are in a
Mm-hmm.
spot, and but when you hit to a certain point, you need to be the person that asks better questions and the person that has better answers. So getting that out front early, creating a culture that identifies that, and then working together to help versus uh, shove each other into the water is good.
And another really important one that I'll just point out here, that in our business I think is really, really critical, is I call it, we seek needed action. So we don't wait to be asked by a customer to do something. We go and look for things that need to be done to make sure their data remains safe. So basically, it's another way of saying proactive. That's another core value that is super critical, and we talk about that all the time.
One of the interesting things about your business, and we touched on it really early on, and but I want to come back to it. When you started, a lot of these things just didn't exist, right? I think modern people that do like modern development work, people take for granted all the tools, all the building blocks, all the Legos they get to stack on top of each other. So where I'm going with this is the amount of change that your industry has experienced in the last 3 years, let alone the last 15. Um, completely changed your workflows, completely changed the way businesses work. You have hybrid cloud deployments now. How have you and your team been able to continually adapt to change? I think the newest change that's coming are the introduction of vector databases to support AI. That wasn't even a thing a couple of years ago, but now it's in conversation a lot. So how have you been resilient to that change, and how do you manage that rapid change in your space?
So the only difference between what's happening now and what happened in the past is the speed of change.
Yeah.
So the I think the principle remains the same, and the principle is always use all the tools available to you in order to do your job the most effectively. So we've always looked for the best tools that we can use to do our jobs. That hasn't changed. The speed of change has changed, right? The acceleration is has certainly changed. And I mean, I don't know exactly how to answer your question, except to say that our team is always learning the newest technologies and applying them. Um, with respect to AI, that you mentioned at the end there, there's I think the introduction to AI, unlike all of the other technological changes, um, is going to be a tsunami. I think it's going to be extremely disruptive to everything that everyone does, not just people in our field. Um, so there's two ways we need to work on that. Number one is using AI, using the large language models to make our jobs, to make us more productive in doing our work. We'll certainly be doing that. But another thing that for us we really need to focus on is how do we help our customers use that technology? And since we're in the data space, what that's going to look like is enabling our customers to lay their corporate data on top of the LLMs. Because right now, I mean, the way I look at this is an LLM, the general purpose LLMs that are out there, ChatGPT, Gemini, all of these that are out there now, that's kind of the equivalent of a college student who has a wealth of general information about the world. They know about history, they know about math, well, to some degree. They're not perfect at math yet, but they know about history. They certainly know language. They know literature, but they don't know your business. They don't know how you do business. They don't know your core values. They don't know your mission. They don't know how you like to treat your customers or your corporate policies. So what we need to do now is we need to take the LLM um, foundational knowledge, and we need to lay the corporate knowledge on top of that in two directions, right? One is essentially filtering the questions that we ask of the LLM through the filter of that corporate knowledge base,
Mm-hmm.
and then filtering the response again through the corporate knowledge base. To do that, to your point about vector databases, we essentially need to take the corporate database, just like OpenAI and Google and Meta has taken the internet and using vectors has put it into neural networks and things of that nature for the large language models. We need to do something similar for the corporate data.
Yeah.
And to do that most effectively, we as data professionals need to do a couple of things. One is that we need to make sure that the data is of very high quality, because now that old phrase "garbage in, garbage out" is on steroids. It's much more critical, I think, now than it used to be. Well, it always was critical, but now it's super critical. So data quality, but also in order to get the best possible answers and in order to be able to really rely on those answers, you have to have context around the data you're giving it. And so there's a whole level of metadata that needs to be built around corporate data, uh, you know, databases, data warehouses. There was always some metadata in corporate, in corporate data structures, but not as much as we'll need when we go into AI. So I think that's the next thing we're going to, I think one of your questions was, what are we going to be working on in the future? And that's where we're going to be going is working on building out the frameworks to get corporate data so that it's usable for the AI systems.
Are there any particular industries you think would most benefit from this, like, first?
Wow. So I think they will all benefit. I think the benefit is equal for all of them, but the challenge is greater for some.
Hmm.
So for example, in the financial industry, I think the challenge is greater because the stakes are super high. There's a lot of math involved. And again, AI is not very good at math yet. So what that's going to now, okay, what I just said is completely not true. AI is
There's
very
an
good at math.
irony to that statement. Yeah, it's
Well,
using math at its foundation, but solving 2 + 2 is actually difficult.
Well, LLMs are not good at math, but machine learning systems are very good at math. LLM is a certain type of AI. It's a certain type of machine learning, and that certain type is just not purpose built for math. So it's not as good as it was. So I redact what I said, but you don't have to redact it because a lot of people know that it's not good at math. The important thing is it's only that type. It's only LLMs that are not good at math. Machine learning is. So to back to your question, I think it's going to be a bigger challenge for financial companies. I think that for any companies where precision is critical, it's a bigger challenge. So if precision is not critical, they're going to be able to get there much faster. If approximations are good enough, it's already there.
Yeah.
If you need to rely on it to get to the 10th decimal place, for a formulation for a product, I'm not sure we're there yet.
When we're looking at, so we have a few clients right now that we're working with this on, and there's a few spaces where we see it works really, really well. The spool up time for customer service reps, traditionally a high churn role. If you can take the product or the category they're working on, train an LLM based on that knowledge set, and make somebody a usable customer service rep in a week, in a month versus a quarter, now that's a win. And if you can do that with sales teams, a win. If you can onboard product management resources or vendors, like all that stuff, we're like, these are the quick win, low hanging fruit in this space. But to your point, turning it into a quant hedge fund model, maybe not yet. Right, we're still working to get there.
So also though, for the the customer service reps, again for financial, it's risky to do that yet because of the things that they're dealing with. I think an important bridge is to very effectively get someone from the AI bot to the human when it's necessary, and when it's necessary, not just for precision, but for customer experience. I think people, we've all been frustrated by telephone chains for a long time. If we get to a point where we take away too many people, and it's all bots, and those bots are just kind of missing the point because they don't have the context of the corporate knowledge base, it's going to drive away customers. So I think we have to be careful as businesses not to minimize the value of our customer service reps. They are our interface to the customer, oftentimes our very first interface to the customer.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think using it like a combine harvester, not even if you use it so the customer service rep has access to the tool to get all the customer or the company knowledge base directly. It can make them more effective, more powerful versus replacing them with a
Totally
robot.
agree.
Yeah,
Totally agree with that. Absolutely. Yeah. Using LLMs in general, or better yet, LLMs augmented with a corporate knowledge base, is a great way to train up individuals in the company. I totally agree.
my buddy just went to a Taco Bell drive-through last week. There's a point to this story, I promise. So, and he was talking to the window and immediately identified, oh, this is a bot. This isn't a human, right? And so he didn't really know how to feel about it. But for that, it's a repeatable thing. But he threw it
Yeah.
a few curveballs and said it handled it okay, but there was a weird delay at the end. So he's like, oh, you could tell it was a robot, but it's going to be interesting to see what happens for those repeatable human tasks like that.
So it's funny you say that. I was just listening to one of my favorite podcasts is the All In podcast. I don't know if you're
Yeah.
familiar with that.
Oh yeah.
I was just listening to
Jason
an episode
Calacanis.
last week. Yes, Jason. And so Chamath Palihapitiya they were talking about this topic. They were talking about AI replacing people. And he said something I totally agree with. Chamath did. He said that humans get a certain satisfaction out of dealing with other humans. And if, even if it's not necessary for it to be another human, it's a nicer experience to deal with another human. There's a connection you get there. In other words, there's more to that interaction than getting the burrito.
The transaction.
When I talk to a person at that Taco Bell, I'm saying burrito. I imagine they have burritos. I never go to Taco Bell's, but sounds like a place that would have burritos.
Yes.
So, but if I go there, I know personally, I love the interaction with people. I would not enjoy that interaction and probably that meal as much if I got it from talking to a bot than if from talking to a person, even though it might be more effective and I might get it faster. So,
do you think that's generational? Perhaps. I know. I'm just
I hope
thinking
not.
of.
No, I'm serious.
Me too.
I
Me
hope
too.
not.
I think I look at maybe. I hate to be. I'm the millennial on the call here, but the Gen Zers, like, who have really. My generation is interesting that there was a life before the computer and social media and the internet, and then after. So there's. I know a world without it. But I think kids who have always grown up with like this level of technology and sort of distance from real human interaction to an extent, are they getting the same thing that you're getting from that human interaction with the Taco Bell drive-through person, or?
Well, I'll say this. I don't know the answer to that, but I'll say this. And this has nothing to do with this conversation, but it's a very interesting one to me. When I want to be careful how I say this. When I observe the Gen Z folks, I don't think they've benefited from the fact that they never had the experience you and I did,
right?
Before everything was digital.
Yeah,
I don't think it was good for them. And I think the more humanness we take out of things, the worse it will be for subsequent generations. So I mean, and that statement is certainly generational, but it's I think it's true, and I think we need to be careful about how much human we take out of things. Machines are great to augment humanity and to enable humanity to produce more and to be more productive. But I don't think it's beneficial when it replaces humans. And we all, those of us humans that are left have to interface with machines. I don't think that's a good thing. So I hope, and to your question, Lauren, I hope not. I hope that the later generations will still appreciate talking to a human more than talking to a machine.
Yeah,
I just think it's a better life.
Agree. I think we're seeing in the stats that while people have more access to access to other people more than they ever did, they're lonelier than ever. And to me, that articulates or, indicates that human interaction really can't be replaced by anything else.
I totally agree with that. It can't. So I hope we all use AI to perhaps free us up from some of the some mundane tasks, or make us faster doing what we can do, so we can spend more time together as people. That's what I hope. And I hope they don't replace Taco Bell reps with machines.
You don't go there.
Okay, well, I hope they don't. I don't hope they don't replace. I don't go any of those places, but I always when I go to my bagel store. When I go to the bagel store, I like talking to Caesar. I don't want to talk to Caesar's bot.
Totally
I just don't.
I want to get handed my Crunchwrap Supreme from a human the way God intended.
Yes.
But
exactly.
The All In podcast talks about this topic too. They were talking about what's that critical point in children's schools of what percentage of students do you need to have a dumb phone before they're not the weirdo? And it ends up being about 15%, right? So if you get about 15 to 20% of the kids in the class and their parents agree, hey, we're a community, we're not going to let them get smartphones until this point. And they were talking about this exact topic, gosh, pretty recently. Charmworth was
they were talking about the anxious generation. Yeah, they were talking about the anxious generation by Jonathan Haidt. Fantastic book.
Great book.
And yeah, so it was probably Jason talking about that, because that's high on his list of concerns, as it should be. We should all be concerned about that. Let's get rid of the cell phones.
It's like our food supply. We're at a point now in life where we're overfed and undernourished, but our human relationships are the same way. You've got more, like Lauren's point, you have more access than ever before, but those relationships are fleeting and undernourishing, which can be scary. And I think the lockdowns that they experienced and not going to school for a year and a half, 2 years didn't help them at all either. Tough spot.
No, it was a perfect storm for that generation.
Really was.
The COVID and the cell phone. Cell phone came out, I think they said in like 2000. The iPhone came out in 2006, and mental health, teen mental health plummeted when that happened. Well, right around 2010, it plummeted.
With the social media, with social media, of like Instagram and
exactly. So so I look, I think all of these technologies can be good, but we need to harness them and use them properly, and hopefully use them to help us interact and not replace interactions.
Yeah, it's like thermite. It's a very valuable tool when pointed in the right direction, but you got to set that reaction off, pointed in the right direction to be able to make things going well. So then in this new world that we're experiencing right now, you probably have new interesting security and data recovery, disaster recovery things you need to put in place. Now, is that changing how you're thinking about this approach, or is it more of the same but faster for you?
So the principles of backing up and disaster recovery really don't change. They changed. The principles don't change. The technique changed with the cloud, with cloud technology and the ability to back up to other clouds and things of that nature. I don't think AI will change anything with respect to backup and recovery. So I think the principles there are the same, and the most important principles are very, very simple. There's nothing magical about this. Test.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very often, our customers come to us, sometime after their backup and recovery systems were put into place, their backups were configured, their standbys were configured. They come to us either because they have a problem or because they're doing a migration or something, and very, very, very often we come in and something in their environment has changed, rendering their backups useless, and their disaster recovery either useless or incomplete. And the only way to combat that is to test, because things shift underneath. The environment is always changing. So you set up a backup regime, on day one, and then over time you add disks and you change storage systems and you do all these things. If you're not testing on a regular basis, you're going to miss something. So to me, testing your DR is super critical. But to answer your question, I guess quickly or succinctly, I don't think AI. I can't think of a way that AI will change that. It stays the same. We need to build it out. We need to make sure there's redundancy, and we need to test it.
No, I think that makes sense. I think just in my mind, the amount of data that's getting produced now, and like making sure if we get a model that works, making sure the model gets backed up as well as the data that provided the model. I think a lot of people don't understand that a lot of these AI models, it's like dropping a marble down a mountain. There's a bunch of different paths it could take, and even if you start with the same data multiple times, it can land in a different crevice. You drop that
Mm-hmm.
marble 1,000 times, it'll end up in a different place. It might be close, but it's just different. And I think not a lot of people are like, oh well, if we lose the model, that's no big deal. We'll just rerun the neural network, but it's not going to be the same. So I
Hmm.
think that's the only thing that I think about in that space. But no,
That's a,
that's
that's a, that's that's a great point, Derek. And I'm going to admit I don't know how they um, how they store the neural network. I don't know how much of that is kept in memory or how much of that is kept solid state. I actually haven't delved into that because up until now I've only been working with the LLMs that are trained and managed by Meta and OpenAI. So they're not our clients yet. so so I don't
got
do
it.
we're not managing those models, and
Yeah, yeah,
storage of those models. We You gave me something really good to think about, and that's a really good insight. That if you retrain the model, first of all, if you retrain the model, it's very unlikely you're going to retrain it on exactly the same data because
yeah,
if you train it today, tomorrow there's some new information, and to your point,
yeah,
that new information completely changes that neural network. The you
yeah.
know the
Completely changes it.
so
And
really good
it's
point.
the weight and
And
bias numbers that are
right,
stored. So
that's right.
basically, you have all these interactions, and then like they just store in a big matrix, multidimensional matrix, what those weight and bias numbers are as they go. And what's really clever is, man, our friends at Red Hat talk about these foundation models, and basically they'll keep the first 10 layers of a neural network the same, and they'll blow away the last ones and retrain those because the first ones are pretty foundational and they take a lot of time and energy and money to build. So they just try
Yep,
any when they can, they just try and iterate on those last little pieces
makes
of it.
sense.
But yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think it's a really interesting place we're in. You're in a really interesting spot, kind of right at the cusp of these massive changes. Every massive change in the computing industry has been reliant on databases. Most modern applications have a front end interface and an API call to a database. That's it, right? Like, so
Yep.
your world is pretty foundational, extremely important, and drives and supports all these businesses, which is
It,
awesome, which is great to see where
it,
it's going.
it is, and specifically relational databases have been remarkably um, resilient to the change. Throughout all of my career, there have been new approaches to database technology. Um, things like column databases and key value stores and vector databases. And even with all of those, uh, the relational model has persisted throughout all of that as really the best way to represent the real world in data. And so even with the vector models, and this is kind of to my point earlier, we're going to need to, whether we train it or whether we use it for retrieval augmented generation, um, we're going to need to still have a relational model, and we're going to need to have metadata in that relational model. And so relational database technology is not going anywhere. I think it's here to stay. The founders, EF Cod and Date and those guys, really came up with an amazing system, and SQL is just a brilliant language that enables so much. And now, of course, AI enables us to be super productive because it can build SQL statements. Once it knows the underlying model.
Yeah, what a world, man! Like, it's just amazing to think when these things were concepted, TCP/IP and SQL databases. No one would ever think that YouTube and AI that this was coming, but still foundationally it worked,
It's
which is
amazing,
pretty wild. So
and
we got
and
two
it's
last
really.
questions. We like. Okay.
Oh, sure.
No, go for it, man.
I,
Didn't mean to interrupt.
I was just saying, if you think about the changes in the world, let's say since the iPhone, right? I mean, since 2010 ish, so much has changed, and the pace of that, change is accelerating. It's hard to imagine the world in 20 years. The things we use on a daily basis in 20 years, like I know that we can't even imagine it, which is kind of mind blowing if you think about it.
And
Yeah,
exciting too.
And exciting, absolutely. Yeah. Yes.
There's a very old book. It's from the 1800s. It's called Flatland, and not like Flat Earth, but it's called Flatland. It's a sci-fi movie of this people that live in a two-dimensional plane, and their shapes are a line, a circle, a square, and then as you go higher up in the priesthood, you have like polygonal shapes. But on Flatland, they all look the same because all you can see is a line, depending if somebody's round or triangular shaped. So you have to be very careful about how they navigate that space. Where it goes to punch through the punchline is a sphere from three-dimensional space comes down to show what 3D space looks like. But the people from Flatland can only see a circle, right? Because as
Wow.
it's pushing through their
Because
space,
all
it's
they
just a
see
circle.
is Wow.
So
Yeah,
it's tough to even imagine what that multidimensional space looks like for somebody that's living in a two-dimensional space.
Which is a very apt description or an analogy for what we're doing now, because if you think about the way those the vector databases work, right? It's all linear algebra in multiple spaces now, in multiple dimensions now, dimensions we can't really when they build those neural networks, it's on more dimensions than we can really conceptualize.
We get
It's cool
3 in
stuff.
time, right? You can
Right.
visualize X,
That's
Y,
right.
Z in
3 in
time.
time.
That's it.
Yep. And
But
they
other
have
than that,
dozens and hundreds.
yep.
So you had
But
two
on
more
that note,
questions.
2 more wrap-up questions. So we'll let Lauren ask her favorite one.
The questions we like to ask at the end are my personal favorites. So if you could have dinner with either the 18 or 25-year-old version of yourself, what advice would you give them? What would you tell them, knowing what you know now?
So my first inclination is to say to think bigger. I always throughout my career, I wouldn't say I was risk averse, because that really wasn't the case, but I didn't visualize really big things. And the reason I hesitate when I say it, because I'm not sure at all I'd want a very big company now, but if I had thought bigger, if I had thought about bigger things, how can I say it? If I thought about making bigger change or making a bigger impact, I think I could have done bigger things. I don't know what that would have looked like, but I think I was self-constrained. And I would encourage myself to take away those constraints, and recognize that people who do great things are just people. They're just people like you and I. And when I was younger, I had the impression that leaders, business leaders, community leaders, were somehow magical beings that had a greater capacity to do things. Since then, I've gotten to know a lot of business leaders and community leaders, and many of them are great people, but they're no different from the rest of us. They just thought bigger. And so that's, I think, what I would say to myself is, take away the constraints, At least think
Self-imposed.
self-imposed constraints.
Mhm.
Right. Right. Assume you can do anything.
Mhm.
That's I think what I would say. And at the same time, don't be hard on yourself if you don't, accomplish all the things on your list. That's okay
Yeah.
too. But
Yeah.
put more things on the list. Maybe that's how I'd say it. Put more things on the list.
Yeah,
We
I think that's great, and I think people do that all the time, where it's like they assume that they see the Elon Musks and the Bezos on TV, and they're like, "Oh, that couldn't be me." But
Right. Exactly.
we often forget that they, are, to your point, are just people who maybe didn't keep those constraints on them, or didn't, look through life with a different lens because they weren't so constrained.
Well, yeah, like, and in some people's case, like Elon Musk, I think he has no sense of constraint. Like he
Right.
just, to him, like constrained, what's that? Like
Yeah.
so I think we can all probably do more than we do. And again, that doesn't mean to say we have to,
Yeah.
but
Mhm.
but I think we constrain ourselves unnecessarily.
I think that's great advice.
Yep.
That's from everyone who's thinking about going to college or thinking about what their next step's going to be. They're like, that's not for me. It's like, well, no, it could be. You can do it. Like you can figure out a way to get to that goal.
You can, and in remarkably short periods of time.
Yeah.
There are many people who begin a new career, in the middle of their life, and
Yeah.
in 15 years build, very successful companies or nonprofits, or they do big things in short periods of time. So one thing that I would say to many of the folks in Gen Z that we just talked about, I know some that, because of that kind of really difficult decade we just went through, are behind the normal the normal timeline, of going to college and starting a job. And I think many of them are really discouraged, and they think, oh, now they're behind forever. And
Mhm.
I would say, no, you're just starting. If you're in your 20s, you got all the time in the world to do anything you want to do. So don't be discouraged
Yeah.
that you lost some time during COVID. That's okay. Start now.
Completely
Yeah. That's
agree.
in. Yeah. It's 2 years can be just a blink, right? There's so many
Just a
things
blank.
that people, like people like, I'm 30 now, I'm 40 now, I'm 50 now. It's like, no, that doesn't matter, because just you can dedicate 2 years to anything and really get an interesting result. So what
So let
you
me,
mentioned the
let me
All In podcast. Go ahead.
I did. So I just want to say one thing that I learned about a while back. I read a book called um, Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell,
Yeah.
and in that book, he posits, and this is debatable a little bit, but I think in principle it's about right. He posits that in order to master anything, you need to do 10,000 hours of practice, and I did a little math on that, and the average American, I think, spends 20 hours a week in front of the television, if I'm not mistaken. There was I figured it out. Like I looked it up and I figured it out. And long story short, if we just and I don't do this, I will say I don't watch TV, but the average American cuts out half of that TV time in their 70-year lifespan, they can completely master 7 things.
Wow.
And that means you could become a tennis pro, or you could become a master cook, or you can become a nuclear engineer. You can master 7 things if you just stay away from the television. So anyway,
Yeah,
I,
or
I digress.
scrolling on Instagram too
Or
is
or
probably the modern
scrolling on
equivalent.
Instagram.
Yeah,
That's right. That's right. Okay,
yeah, I
so
think
sorry, I interrupted you. Sorry.
well, no, it's related to that. You basically answered the next question. It's like, what books or podcasts are on in front of your mind right now? So you mentioned Outliers. You've talked about the All In podcast. That's a favorite of ours as well. So what other media are you consuming? We know it's not
Hmm.
TV.
Great. So my favorite podcast of all is Tim Ferriss.
Oh yeah.
And that's because he's a brilliant interviewer, almost as good as you guys, and and he brings on really, really interesting people, leaders in their fields. of all kinds. And I have learned so much from that podcast. I've learned what he does is he goes into the habits and routines of people.
Mhm.
And I've taken a lot of those habits and I've adopted them, and it's really improved my life. So that's right up there on the very, very top. Tim Ferriss, especially his earlier ones. The last, if anybody dives in now, for the past, I don't know, 6 months or so, he's kind of been on a sabbatical. So he's been doing shorter versions, clips of his older ones. I would say go back to his early days and start from the beginning and just listen to. I mean, he's got hundreds. Just listen to them; they're awesome. So that's as far as that podcast. I think that's my favorite. As far as books, wow, books. What would I say is my top book? There's so many. Sorry for the pause. We can edit that out.
No.
So Atomic Habits. Atomic Habits is a fantastic book. Okay. The Checklist Manifesto. I'm going with that because it applies to everything. It's super interesting because it helps you understand how they do impossible things like build skyscrapers and make them not fall. And you can apply it to every part of life, and it makes everything better. So the Checklist Manifesto.
Okay, I'll have to read that. I have not heard of that.
Yeah,
is it like project management? But like a book on project management, or
it is. Well, it's all about. It's not about project management in general. A great book for project management is what is the name of it? High Output Management. Output Management, fantastic book for that. But no, the Checklist Manifesto is just about it illustrates the importance of, for any process you do, whether it's personal, I rebuilt my deck recently, whether it's rebuilding your deck, whether it's doing a computer project, the importance of, in the beginning, make a checklist of all the things that need to be done in the order in which they need to be done. Very, very simple, but it changes everything. It makes things get done faster and better and avoids mistakes that you have to go back for.
It's so funny how some of the most obvious statements and obvious things are the ones we end up following the least because they're obvious. But as soon as you put them right back in front of you, it's like gravity. It just works and you get good results out of it.
And it's easy. I mean, nothing's easier than making a checklist. Back to baking, right? I mean, a recipe is a checklist. And without that, you're done. Even if you've baked 100 times before, you want to have that in front of you, and you want to check it off because you might forget the baking soda.
For sure.
And if you forget the baking soda, you wonder why it didn't rise. Right?
100%.
And I love the symmetry of starting with baking and wrapping up on baking. So I think that worked out really well. The universe delivered us a happy accident there. But Bob, really great having you on. It was amazing to hear about your story, hear about what you're working on, hear about Buda Consulting is really driving forward with the database industry and adapting to the changing environments that we're experiencing right now. So thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate you having you on.
This was really fun. Thanks
Bob.
for the time.
Thanks, Bob.